The shoe came down on the credit card like a verdict. A polished loafer crushed lacquer against laminated plastic. The card squealed beneath the heel, a small, humiliating crunch that seemed to magnify in the marble hush of the Sterling Grand lobby. Chandeliers scattered a cold light across the floor. The large analog clock above the concierge desk kept indifferent time. In the background, a framed leadership gallery hung high on the east wall. A neat row of corporate headshots in cold metal frames. Faces with perfect teeth and carefully styled hair. One of them, at the center, showed a woman with a steady gaze and a short, cropped style, Maya Richardson. The portrait was part of the decor, a neutral plaque among glass and brass. Nobody had looked at it twice. "Get your ghetto ass out of my hotel," Derek Walsh said, slow and theatrical, as if practicing for an audience. He had the baritone delivery of someone who spent nights cultivating authority. He leaned over the counter. His face was close enough that his breath fogged the plastic payment terminal. Around him, the night shift staff posed like a small defensive chorus. Sarah at the desk, her knuckles white on a pen. Patricia at the side, jaw tight and eyes flicking to the lobby doors. Maya stood where the life of the lobby funneled into a single point, her suitcase beside her, the prepaid confirmation on her phone glowing back at her. She was dressed like someone who had been traveling overnight, an oversized blazer, jeans, and sneakers. Her hair was pulled into a low bun. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet and precise. "I have a reservation for the penthouse. Prepaid. Confirmation number 624190 Alpha." Derek's hand flattened the card again, a theatrical dismissal. "You sure you're at the right hotel?" he asked, tone laced with mock concern. "You don't look like you can afford that room." Maya's eyes flicked to the clock on her phone, 14:37. Her Tokyo call started at 15 I. For a moment she thought of the video conference window opening in another time zone, of a boardroom waiting with half the executive team awake overnight. Then she put those thoughts aside. There were more important things in this moment than screens. A young woman at a plush armchair near the windows had already lifted her phone and was pointing it between them, whispering. She was on the live stream before anyone decided to be famous. Her username, Jennifer Kim Live, floated over the window in the margin of 1,000 small boxes. "Checking out the hospitality here, LOL. Sterling Grand." Viewers began to gather on the feed like a crowd forming in a town square. The viewer count blinked. 1,200, 3,500, 9,800. Comments cascaded in the lower third. "Is this real? Why would they do that? That manager is insane." One comment asked, "Who is that woman?" Most were sympathetic, some were ghoulish. A few were already composing outraged threads to post elsewhere. "Sir," Maya said, the single syllable even. Her hand rested on her phone as if she were ready to raise it to get proof. "I booked this room 3 months ago. It's paid. The confirmation is here. If there's a problem with your system, I can give you the last 4 digits. Derek slashed the air. "You can't check in without a card. Policy." He jabbed a finger at a laminated employee handbook on the counter, its corner splayed. "We have rules. Section 14. Security reasons. We protect our guests." "You never asked for ID," Maya observed. Her tone had no accusation in it, only fact. That linear calm bothered Derek. He loved being the man to redraw the line of public conduct. Patricia stepped forward then, small and apologetic. "Sir, maybe we can override. Call the manager." She glanced at Derek and then at Sarah, looking for permission and finding none. Derek refused. "No override. We can't accept strangers claiming high rooms. Too many scams." He smiled a little at the onlookers, pleased with the performance. The crowd recognized a standard script and fell in love with the drama. Somebody laughed, the sort of nervous sound that can flip into menace. Phones raised higher. Jennifer narrated into her camera, breathless. "You guys, this guy wants her out because she doesn't look like a guest. She says she has a reservation. Can you believe this?" Maya's jaw tightened for one measured second and then relaxed. She pulled from her pocket not a card, but a thin black leather wallet. Her corporate creds nested there, a business card, a small key fob. She did not flash them. She merely shifted enough to show the credentials without a flourish. Derek pretended not to look. On the edge of the desk, the front desk monitor hummed. A clerk's dashboard showed an incident log in half-visible columns. A recent line caught Maya's eye as she weighed her options. Night manager. Complaint. Guest ID verification refusal. 0812. Escalated. The entry was unsigned. Maya's fingers slid the phone from her pocket, and as casually as she might scoop sugar, she pointed the camera at the log. The screen registered in her photograph as if she had always meant to do it. A few feet away, Marcus Thompson, the security chief, arrived in a quiet, infrastructural way. He was tall, solid, made to look like a wall. He walked at an angle between the desk and the lobby, eyes steady, scanning threats in a practiced way. Derek flicked a hand as if summoning a herald. "Marcus," Derek called, "we've got a situation." Marcus's look at Maya was unreadable. He was trained to de-escalate, and yet he knew the script. If the manager said remove, he would step in. The hotel needed a certain rhythm of obedience to hum along. He checked Derek's face, then looked at the crowd and the phones and the tiny volcano of a live feed swelling in the corner. He felt the physics of it, the way small acts of exclusion could become large, fast. "You sure there's no ID?" Marcus asked Maya softly. His voice was more concerned for liability than for dignity. "I have everything you need," she said. "Reservation confirmation is prepaid. I can show the card used for travel. I can show the email. I can call my assistant." For a blink, the human part of Marcus softened, yet the night air felt taut, like a wire pulled between two poles. A young man in a suit near the potted ficus had a laptop open. His cursor hovered over a news feed. He tilted his head at the stream and muttered, "This could go sideways." He posted a clip to his own account, the 3-second hammer of Derek's heel on the card already edited into a meme. Someone online always did that. Maya slid her hand into the pocket of the blazer and took out a small envelope, a prepaid keycard, the size of a credit card, a discreet sticker that read, "Penthouse Prepaid." She put it on the counter, not with triumph, but with a calm expectation. "That should do it," she said. Derek snorted. "That could be fake," he said. His tone invited laughter, and someone obliged. A small cluster of late-night guests glanced up from their drinks and whispered. One older woman murmured to her companion, "How awful." Marcus was holding the line between what the law required and what common decency would have said. "Let's verify on the system," he suggested. Derek clicked the keyboard with showman's slowness, pretending to consult. He hovered over the screen as if translating an ancient text. "Reservation doesn't match the name that's on the card," Derek announced. "No primary card matched on file. We can't check you in." Maya's phone chimed then, an incoming message from the company legal counsel in another time zone, confirming an updated payment method. She did not reveal the message. Instead, she looked at Derek with a flat patience that made him shift. This was not a fight she wanted to have about minutia. This was a fight about how people were seen, and he had already skewed the field to his favor. "Sir," she said, "if you run the reservation, you'll see the authorization. You can verify it with accounting." "No time," Derek replied. He was already building the second layer of the playbook. Escalate to security. "We're going to have to refuse service. I'm going to call for backup." At the word backup, the phones in the lobby tilted as though to focus a spotlight. Jennifer's viewer count leapt. 12,400, 25,800, 41,000. Comments exploded with indignation and memes. "Sterling shame" began to trend in the live chat as people recycled outrage into a hashtag. Maya reached for her phone to record. She knew the world this moment lived in. The thought of immediate legal leverage flicked past. Plaintiff's counsel, reputational risk, stock implications. But she did not allow herself indulgence. She had built a company by looking at systems rather than personalities. She would treat this the same. She would collect data, present a pattern, and fix the system. She would not feed the crowd with the spectacle of her own humiliation. "Before you call anyone," she said, "I want to give you a chance to verify. It will take you minutes." Her voice was neutral but firm. "If you prefer, I will wait outside so you can process it without me here." Derek smiled like a man offering charity. "That would be best," he said. "You can wait with the other loiterers." The standoff had gathered a small orbit. Two businessmen who had been talking about markets stopped mid-sentence. A mother with a stroller crossed her arms. An older couple, regulars of the hotel, watched as if the scene had turned midnight into theater. Sarah, the young clerk at the desk, kept stealing looks between Derek and Maya, her hands trembling. "You can wait in the lobby, ma'am," Derek said. "We'll secure your luggage for you." His smile was a wedge. Maya packed her phone away like a person pocketing a tool. She took a breath and stepped to the side, into the armchair, as if she were heading for tea and patience. She sat with her suitcase and kept her composure, which, to the crowd, read like an admission of defeat. Her shoulders did not hunch. From the lobby chairs, a man got to his feet and crossed the floor slowly. He approached Derek with a rigid politeness. "Excuse me," he said, "but this is uncomfortable to watch." Derek's chest puffed with vindication. "You saw what happened?" "No," the man interrupted. "I saw a manager humiliate a guest who provided a confirmation. I'd like to speak to a supervisor." He moved his hand toward his phone, dialing. Derek stiffened. The word supervisor mattered. It changed the scene from a small skirmish to a matter requiring escalation up the chain. Across the desk, Patricia's eye met Derek's. For a second, she looked like she wanted to say something that would stop the moment then and there. Instead, she said, "I'll try to reach regional." The phone at the desk rang, environmental static and a distant voice patching in. Meanwhile, Jennifer's live feed kept inhaling viewers, 2,000 more in 30 seconds. The chat scrolled in a trembling blur. "Black woman denied at hotel. We need receipts. This manager needs training. Call his HR." Maya watched the screen of the live feed with clinical interest. People have always been mirror-hungry. Their outrage could shine light or only heat. This was not a gamble. She had seen how quickly public attention could force institutions to move. It was, however, unpredictable. She needed to be precise. A thought ran across her mind, brief and jagged. The leadership gallery on the wall. The portrait of the company heads was visible through the lobby's glass glare. No one paid it any mind now. She'd seen that same framed photo months earlier when she'd visited the Sterling Grand's corporate event space, a stock image of leadership that comforted investors. They had printed her headshot there. Her portrait was in that neat line of neutral smiles. She had chosen a studio shot for the site, rational lighting, button jacket. It was supposed to make the brand feel personal but corporate. Nobody at the Sterlings liked flamboyance. For a moment, a guest in the corner, one of the men who had been watching, tilted his phone to include the wall in his feed. Viewers on Jennifer's stream began to notice the gallery in the background, the low-grade intrigue of a detail. "What's that on the wall?" someone typed. A hand in the chat that enjoyed puzzle-solving wrote, "Zoom into the wall." On instinct, a dozen people on the live platform started zooming the frame. Picture-in-picture boxes blossomed, grainy close-ups of the silver frames, a slightly out-of-focus headshot that bore a resemblance to Maya. A commenter typed, "Isn't that her?" It landed among thousands of messages like a pebble hitting still water. Sarah behind the desk was making another attempt to follow protocol. She touched the computer screen and found the reservation again, half expecting a different result. The system asked for verification codes and secondary payment authorization. Derek, watching her, kept the narrative tight. Fraud, impersonation, risk. He had learned to take the moral high ground by making someone else's dignity the currency of his authority. Marcus hovered like an immovable ship in a small dock. In his pocket, his phone vibrated. A message from corporate security flagged for possible reputational incident. His thumb brushed it. He read, "Night shift. Monitor and de-escalate. Escalate to regional only if physical threat. Log all actions." Marcus felt the weight of that instruction press at the back of the moment. Maya did not act yet. She sat with a controlled patience, listening to the small ails of gossip and judgment around her. She had known humiliation before, not this blackness of a single peaked insult, but the cumulative drain of people's assumptions over decades. There were evenings she had spent burning the midnight oil to build something out of a skeletal idea. There were moments in boardrooms when she sat mute while someone else took credit for the work that had put clients on the map. She had learned not to feed the performance of outrage with her own temper. If she fed him his narrative, Derek would get stronger. Her mind flicked, briefly and efficiently, through assets and options. The hotel was a publicly traded property of the Sterling Estates Group, a company she had founded and built over 15 years. She held the majority of shares not because she had wanted the trappings, but because she believed a hotel could be more than a check-in counter and a minibar. She'd spent years trying to make the brand a place where people felt seen, not judged. There were memories that cut like cold glass, late nights calling back vendors, the first time they had had to downsize to survive a recession, the young receptionist who'd stayed 2 extra months before she could afford rent. The truth was, even as an owner, she'd always consulted at the edges: policy, finance, product. She had trusted middle management to hold the brand's values steady. Now she noticed the seams. Up close in the live chat, someone had already circled the leadership gallery. "Wait, zoom in on that headshot," a comment shouted. The feed multiplied. Jennifer's voice, quick and incredulous, narrated breathlessly. Guys, do you see that? She's all over the wall." The lobby seemed to tighten at the edges. Conversation fluttered like trapped birds. Derek's smile thinned. "What wall? Which?" he began. Sarah's head turned. For a moment it was an ordinary human motion, a clerk trying to follow multiple things at once. Her eyes caught the framed photo. The image landed like a hand on a page. Recognition is a small, sharp thing. It translates visual data into human context. The color of someone's eyes, the tilt of a chin, the small cleft in the lip, sparks of association popped. Sarah's hand went to her mouth. Her pen fell from her fingers and clattered to the desktop. The sound scattered. For an instant, nobody spoke. The live feed's chat dissolved into rapid punctuation, then silence, then a roar of notification. OMG. No way. She's the CEO? Derek's face shifted. The theatrical mask slipped for a beat, revealing a more raw emotion, dread going costume. He took a step back as if the front desk had leaned forward under the pressure of a new truth. The crowd edged closer. Jennifer's viewers spiked. 96,400, 142,000. The lobby lights seemed to sharpen into definition, like the world suddenly being relit for an audience. Patricia, who had been trying to reach regional, finally took in the room as if scanning a diagram that had shifted. Her lips trembled and she whispered, "Is that—" Marcus's eyes narrowed, measuring risk again, but this time under a different frame. He glanced at Derek as if he'd been watching a bad play and realized he was in the middle of it. Derek's throat worked. Maya watched them all. Her face remained an even mask, but there was a slow, internal tightening, like a tide that had been held back by a dam and was beginning to find a seam. The gallery was a mirror that she had not asked to be shown in public. She had always kept a certain distance between the company she created and the warm, messy business of people's lives. Her portrait on the lobby wall had been meant to be a brand anchor, not a billboard for dignity. It had been, instead, a possible instrument of reversal now. Her phone vibrated in her hand. Her assistant had texted, "Are you at Sterling? Feed is blowing up. Regional legal on call." But Maya kept the phone face down. Timing mattered. She had to let the room collapse around the recognition without her directing it. Any overture now would look like a stunt. Sarah's mouth opened. The word she said was small and thin, barely audible at first. "Oh my God!" The sound moved through the lobby like a current. People's eyes darted up to the wall. The headshot in the frame was now something else. An evidence. On Jennifer's feed, a momentary freeze frame of the portrait popped into the corner of the screen. Comments multiplied. "She runs this place? You work for me." Someone edited a caption into the stream, the seeds of a meme already forming. Derek's composure stuttered. "That's not possible," he blurted. His voice carried a thread of panic now, the smallness of a man who had lost a practiced script. Patricia stepped toward Sarah and touched her arm as if to ground both of them. "We need to call corporate," she said. Her voice was strained. She had been complicit at the edge but not eager for the consequences. Do it, Marcus said, but his eyes were not on the phone. He was looking at Maya, measuring her without the manager's assumptions. The room took an involuntary, collective breath. Outside, through the glass, a car pulled up. Headlights swept the corridor like the slow sweep of an audience spotlight. Maya rose, moving through the lobby with her suitcase in hand. She did not rush. She did not glare. She walked like a person taking back a tune that had been interrupted. Phones recorded the way she moved, the deliberate set of her shoulders, the careful cadence of her step. Jennifer's voice, high with thrill, narrated. She's walking up to the desk. She looks like she knows what's happening. Maya set her suitcase down in front of the counter and faced Derek. You work for me, she said quietly. The line landed not as a gloat, but as a fact. It was precise, surgical. Derek's face transformed in a single beat, from affront to something closer to shame. Around him, the lobby turned to look. Cameras focused. The live feed exploded with reaction. Bursts of applause in digital form, waves of shocked emojis. Maya reached into the envelope again, this time producing a slim card that said in small print, Sterling Estates, majority shareholder. It was not a theatrical move so much as the next logical step in a line of evidence she had been assembling. She placed it on the desk so that the cameras could pick it up, but she didn't speak. Derek's hand trembled. He looked at the card, then at the portrait on the wall. The cognitive dissonance was complete. The pedestal he had built himself to stand on had a crack, and now a hand rested on the other side of it. The lobby's murmur swelled, somewhere between satisfaction and alarm. Marcus's jaw relaxed faintly, as if a pressure valve had been opened. Patricia had tears in her eyes. Sarah looked like someone who realized she had been reading a script rather than a person's life. Somewhere, in the blur of the livestream's chat, a user typed, "This is what public witness is for." Another typed, "Recording saved." People were already imagining headlines, but not everyone felt righteous. A few guests began to murmur, uneasy at the sudden turn of the narrative. "We should be careful," an older man said, as if an apology might smooth the edges. Derek, who had performed authority all night, looked like a man who'd lost both the script and the stage. Maya did not move to pronounce judgment. She folded her hands lightly on the counter, the picture of precise control. "We'll get this sorted," she said. "But first, I want the reservation honored and my luggage taken to the penthouse. And log everything that happens here, every action, every note." It was not a demand so much as a mechanism. She wanted data. Evidence would build patterns, and patterns would lead to systemic change. She was not here for personal satisfaction. She was here for measurable reforms. She could think of audits, HR processes, retraining, and external oversight. But those came later. First, she needed to know what had happened and why. Derek swallowed, then nodded, mechanical, like a marionette whose strings had been slackened. "Yes, ma'am." The live feed churned, the audience still there, hungry for resolution, but now with a new angle. A woman wronged by the very institution she'd helped to create. Threads spun outward across platforms. Jennifer's viewer count hit 250,000 in minutes. The hashtag spread like oil on water. Maya allowed herself a small, private breath. The tide had shifted, but there was work to do. Recognition did not equal reform. She understood that the portrait on the wall could expose a truth, but the truth needed scaffolding, documentation, accountability, policy change. Her phone buzzed again. Regional Legal had answered and requested an immediate secure line. Her assistant texted an update about the Tokyo call being delayed. As people around the desk fumbled to recompose, a new detail showed up on the monitor. A flagged internal log with Derek's name, and a series of prior entries, badly formatted and anonymous, but pointing to patterns. Complaints about guest handling, profile flagging, discriminatory language used. 3 entries over the past 12 months. Maya's eyes, which had the habit of skimming for patterns, took them in like a catalog. She did not point. She let the room adjust to her presence and the recognition. Public witness had done its part. Now, internal instruments of the organization would be the tools she used to fix the system. She thought of Section 1403 of the Employee Handbook, visible on the corner of the desk. Unauthorized denial of service, disciplinary grounds. Later, it would be an iron rule in audit reports. For now, the moment was a pivot. Cameras hummed. Derek stood small. Sarah stared at her dropped pen. Patricia's shoulders shook. Marcus's hand rested on his radio, as if sensing the need to sound the alarm or hush it. The lobby held its breath for the next move. Maya reached down and rested her hand on her suitcase, fingers mapping the leather handle. This was not the end of anything yet. There would be investigations and choices, resignations, retraining, perhaps even a public letter. She could imagine the company auditors parsing complaint numbers and revenue dips, the PR drafts already being written in other rooms. She had a plan for that work, but she would let procedure do its job. "Please call corporate," she said quietly to Patricia, "and log all prior complaints tied to Derek Walsh. I want every incident, every report in the last 2 years. Also, pull staffing schedules and retention numbers for this location. I'll wait in the penthouse if you need me to." Her voice held no command for retribution, only for information. Patricia, flustered but now owning a role that demanded courage, tapped for regional and murmured, "Yes, ma'am, yes." Outside the arrival doors, headlights cut for a delivery van. Inside, the lobby slowly unfolded back into the rhythm of a hotel trying to recompose itself. But the underside of the scene had changed. Phones would carry clips and comments into feeds across the globe. Patterns would be traced. For Maya, who worked in the sober math of balance sheets and attrition graphs, it was data that would make a case. She stood there for a long second longer, not to bask, but to observe. Her mind was already ticking. Incident logs, employee history, HR won't act without a paper trail. Public perception required immediate transparent action. She thought of the guest dignity initiative she had once proposed in a quiet room, shelved because it seemed expensive. Now it felt necessary and right. People were still watching when she finally turned to the portrait on the wall. Up close it showed her sleeves rolled back. A steady jaw. Something that meant business without theatrics. In the frame, she was smaller and a little softened by studio lights. On the live feeds, the portrait image circulated in overlay with the scene at the desk, evidence piggybacking on indignity. "Make sure this is all logged," she told Marcus, who had found again the professional reserve that did not depend on sympathy. "I want every conversation transcribed from tonight. Then we'll decide the next steps." He nodded, and this time his nod was the plain, practical agreement of someone who understood his role in chain of custody. The first moves had been made. The cameras had done what cameras do. They cut reality into small, shareable pieces. The portrait on the wall had become a hinge upon which the moment swung. But the hinge was not the whole door. Beyond it waited policy, process, and the slow necessary mechanics of institutional change. For Maya, this was only the beginning. She had been humiliated in front of her staff and guests, and she had the evidence to prove it. She had the leverage to demand an account. Yet she also had to decide how to wield that leverage, whether to punish a man or to remake a system. She had always preferred the latter. A hush settled as phones continued to buzz. Jennifer's stream captioned the scene. "Watch. Woman denied entry until they notice her photo in the lobby. Sterling Grand." The tag began to climb the charts. Meanwhile, inside the hotel, Patricia finally reached the regional line and put them on hold for a conference call, fumbled and apologetic. Derek, who had been preparing his defense in his head, sat down suddenly as if the room had pulled a rug from underneath him. Maya picked up her suitcase again. She moved toward the elevators with a small, deliberate gait. The penthouse door was 2 floors up, and as she passed the gallery, she caught Sarah's eye once more. Sarah's face had shifted from complicit to unsettled to raw. There was a new awareness there, an admission of error perhaps, or the beginning of remorse. As the elevator's brass doors closed behind Maya, Jennifer's viewers spiked into the millions with the clip looped on other platforms. Comments and shares exploded like a brush fire. Somewhere in a meeting room online, corporate counsel began to type a template response. The door slid shut. Inside, Maya pressed the call button for the penthouse and felt the small thrum of restrictions shifting. She had not yet announced consequences. She had not yet flipped any switches. but a set of facts had been set in motion. A man had refused to recognize a guest's rights. That man's behavior had been recorded. A portrait on the wall had made the connection visible. The next hours would stretch into a ledger of decisions. When the elevator reached the top, the penthouse door opened into a quiet room, smelling of lemon polish and faint lavender. Maya set her suitcase down, then pulled out her laptop and opened a note. She began to catalog the elements she would need. Timestamps of Jennifer's feed, screenshots of the leadership gallery, the entries in the incident log, Derek's name, prior complaint excerpts. She typed fast, arranging the data like bricks. Her first move would be to get a full file from the desk, signed and stamped. Her second would be to convene HR and legal, an audit, not a show trial. Her third would be to make an offer to the staff, training and rehabilitation for those genuinely willing to change, termination for those with patterns of discrimination or malice. Her fourth would be to formalize the Guest Dignity Initiative and pilot it at the Sterling Grand with external oversight. She paused at the list and let herself imagine the 3-month follow-up report. Complaints down, guest satisfaction metrics up, staff retention improving, a new QR-based incident reporting feature in place. For a beat, she allowed herself the practical pleasure of problem-solving. But before strategy came, closure would have to be had in the lobby. The elevator doors opened, and a shout reached the penthouse. Someone's phone left in the foyer. The distant murmur of people who had not yet settled. There would be public statements drafted tonight. There would be calls to staff and a choice for Derek to make. Maya set her jaw. She was not here to humiliate him. She believed in building structures that protected dignity. Still, there would be consequences, and the first of those would be transparency. Down in the lobby, the portrait watched over the room like a quiet witness, its small plaque gleaming under the light. Maya Richardson, Chief Executive Officer. The plaque was meant to reassure. Tonight, it had been the thing that revealed truth. Back in the penthouse, Maya opened the top drawer of her desk and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. She wrote, in careful block letters, "Document everything, prioritize healing, no show trials." Then she added, smaller, "Involve community oversight." She looked at the clock on the wall. It was 15:04. Her Tokyo call was late now. That could wait. Tonight, the company had a wound it needed to treat. The cameras had already invited the world to watch. She would make sure they watched how a system could change. But the system does not fix itself in one day. Doors would have to be opened wider than a single apology. Processes would need to be rewritten. People would have to be held accountable. Down in the lobby, a new noise had started. A crowd gathered not just to watch but to ask questions. Phones were still filming. The portrait on the wall had been found once. What happened next would determine whether recognition became reform, or only a spectacle. Maya clicked her laptop closed and stood again. She smoothed her blazer and headed for the elevator. There were calls to be made, people to meet, a policy memo to send before dawn. She would go back downstairs and begin the work of turning this sharp public moment into structural change. As the elevator descended, Jennifer's live feed showed Derek looking small and flustered at the counter, surrounded by the phones that had once been his proof. Sarah stood a little straighter. Patricia had her hand over her mouth. Marcus was on the line with regional security. The lobby lights reflected off the silver frame of Maya's portrait, making the image glow like a lighthouse. The doors opened. Maya stepped out into the lobby again, a woman whose face in the portrait had shifted from art to evidence. She did not move toward vengeance. She moved toward procedure. Someone in the crowd said something about lawyers. Someone else said they hoped the hotel would change. A voice in the live chat typed, "This is only the beginning." The night hummed with uneasy anticipation. Maya walked to the desk and looked Derek in the eye. He was no longer the man who could fix problems by refusing service. He was a subordinate now called to explain himself beneath the same roof he guarded. "I want a full report by morning," she told him, calm and careful. "And I want the incident logged under Section 14.3. We will be conducting a formal review." Her voice carried the weight of a shareholder and the patience of someone who knew how to build systems. Derek swallowed. The lobby watched. Phones recorded. The portrait on the wall looked like a promise, no longer decorative but declarative. For the moment, the public had witnessed the reversal. But as Maya knew, reversals can be momentary unless followed by concrete steps. Tonight would be a test of whether recognition translated into accountability. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, the lobby of the Sterling Grand had become a small crucible where a corporate value and human dignity met, and, in the collision, began to rewrite each other's borders. The cameras kept rolling. The portrait remained on the wall, a quiet reminder that what we hang on our walls can sometimes speak back. The next hours would be about decisions. Who would stay? Who would go? What training would be mandated? How the hotel would track and publish its changes. Maya would have to decide whether to pursue disciplinary action or to repair via structured retraining and external oversight. She would need to balance mercy with the company's duty to guests. For now, the night was a hinge. The portrait had opened a door. Maya had stepped through into. If this scene touches something you've seen or lived through, leave a comment after this. Tell us what happened, where you were, and how it ended. Stories like this matter. The conference line on Maya's laptop blinked as regional counsel and a security analyst came through on muted windows. Patricia's voice crackled at the desk, then steadied into the business of doing what needed to be done. Luggage moved to the penthouse, the reservation honored, a forensic copy of the front desk terminal made and preserved. Marcus, efficient and unshowy, had already placed a blank audio recorder on the counter and set the radio to log only. Sarah hovered nearby, eyes red, fingers too quick to sit still. Derek had been asked politely, then less politely, to accompany Marcus to a back office to wait while the paperwork was collected. He walked with the mechanical dignity of a man still rehearsing his authority, but his shoulders were smaller than they had been. Maya watched him go, then closed her laptop to turn fully to the room. She did not speak loudly. She did not need to. The narrative had shifted. Cameras and phones were still trained on the desk, but now the people behind those screens were waiting to see what would be done next. First, she said, addressing the on-call counsel and the regional director whose face filled one of the small windows. We secure everything. We preserve the live feed, the log entries, and the desk cam footage. We notify legal that this is a possible Title VII risk and reputational incident. I want a chain of custody on every piece of evidence, and an immediate suspension pending investigation where warranted. The regional director, a woman whose expression was calibrated to crisis, nodded. Understood. We'll open an incident report and follow your recommendations. Maya let that settle the administrative necessities, and then leaned into the moment that mattered most to her. What this would mean for the people involved and for the wider system. She had built Sterling Estates out of a conviction that hospitality could be decentered from hierarchy and focused on human dignity. That belief had made for long nights and tighter margins, but it also formed her moral architecture. Now the architecture needed repair. We'll give staff 3 options, she continued, voice even. 1. Voluntary resignation for those who believe they cannot align with the standards we must now enforce. 2. Immediate termination for cause where there's a documented pattern of discriminatory behavior. 3. A structured mandatory rehabilitation and retraining program for those willing to actively change. All will require documented learning plans and public acknowledgement in our external report. There was a quiet intake of breath on the line. The phrasing was legal, precise, and humane. The regional counsel asked for time to draft the formal wording. Maya agreed and asked Marcus to escort Derek to a private space where he could be briefed by HR. Marcus did so with a practiced, neutral face that did not shame so much as contain. In the small office at the back of the lobby, with a whiteboard and spare coffee cups, Derek sat across from an HR manager who read the script people were often handed in such moments. We are taking all allegations seriously. We will conduct an investigation. You are suspended pending that review. The words might have been boilerplate, but the way they landed in Derek's mouth was not theatrical any longer. The mask had already been stripped. He looked at the HR manager, then at the thin envelope of his ID card, then at the door. Do you understand? She asked. He exhaled, the sound of a man who had rehearsed 1,000 lines and found none of them true. Yes, he said. Back at the desk, Patricia's hands did not stop moving. She called regional support, then cleaned a small spill at the corner of the counter, as if to make the surface look less like evidence and more like a safe, ordinary workspace. Sarah, who had dropped the pen earlier, picked it up and tucked it into her pocket the way a person tucks away a small guilty thing. Jennifer, the woman whose feed had made the moment public, had been allowed in by the hotel to sit with guests in the lounge, while the immediate steps were taken. Maya watched her approach with a composed curiosity. Jennifer had a bright, breathy kind of presence that read well on camera. She had kept narrating the scene with the kind of immediacy that turns private injustice into public record. Maya had noticed in the footage that Jennifer's commentary rarely indulged in sermonizing. She asked questions and amplified realities. That mattered. "I'm Maya," she said, extending a hand that closed around Jennifer's without theatrics. "Thank you for filming this. We need people like you to make sure it was seen honestly." Jennifer blinked as if the recognition surprised her. "I didn't expect. I just saw it and started streaming. I didn't know who she was at first. Then the wall. Everyone started zooming." "We'll need your footage," Maya said, "and your permission to use it in our internal investigation and subsequent transparency report." Jennifer agreed almost immediately. Later, Maya would offer her a role as a community liaison during the rollout of the Guest Dignity Initiative, someone to represent the chorus of witnesses who could translate the public pulse into corporate action. That night did not move at the speed of victory. It moved at the speed of administration, of people asking for more than an apology. They wanted change. Maya went to work in the way she always did, by assembling evidence, asking the right questions, and naming the metrics she needed. She asked for the last 2 years of incident reports from the Sterling Grand, all customer complaints flagged for discrimination, staff retention rates and exit interview summaries, performance reviews and any notes tied to Derek Walsh, CCTV footage, the reservation system's audit trail for the penthouse, and the front desk assignment logs. The data came in dribs and bursts, a folder with incident logs, a stack of redacted emails from guests, an internal spreadsheet that summarized complaint categories across properties. There, in black and white, a pattern emerged that made her stomach tighten. The Sterling Grand's front desk complaints for hostile guest interactions had risen 28% year over year, while staff turnover at the property sat at 38%, well above company average. The local Net Promoter Score for guest experience had dropped by 7 points, and the property had lost nearly 8% in revenue compared to forecasting projections for the quarter. The numbers matched the anecdotal. Maya saw names and dates and notes that pointed to recurring patterns. Flagged guests of color being asked for additional proof, repeated profile flagging, not matched by crime reports, and multiple escalation logs where night managers had chosen to refuse service. There were at least 3 prior entries specifically naming Derek in complaint narratives from the last 12 months, redacted, unsigned, stapled to internal memos that had been filed away without follow-up. Section 14.3 of the Employee Handbook, unauthorized denial of service, disciplinary grounds, was plain in the corner of the page. Maya kept her face steady as she absorbed the evidence. She had not come down to the Sterling Grand to deliver a dramatic lesson to a single man. She had come to repair an institutional failure. That did not mean there would be no consequences. It meant the consequences needed to be measured and stated in terms that would prevent recurrence. She convened a short private meeting the next morning in the penthouse's small conference room. Present were regional counsel, the head of HR for Sterling Estates, Marcus, Sarah, who had asked to attend, and Patricia. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish. The portrait over the fireplace caught the morning sun and sent a square of light across the table. Maya did not begin with recriminations. She began with a reminder. "We started Sterling Estates because hotels should be places of refuge, not tests of worth," she said. "Tonight showed us a failure in that promise. It was a measurable failure. We will address it with data, process, and heart. We will also be transparent." She outlined the 3-track approach that would govern the next steps. Immediate administrative actions, a public statement that would acknowledge the facts while awaiting the investigation, and a set of reforms to implement at the Sterling Grand with the goal of piloting across the group. Patricia's eyes filled. She had wanted to say something earlier, more than an I'll call regional. And now she did. I didn't mean for it to go that way, she said, voice small. We just followed the manager. I wish I had done more. We all have a role, Maya replied. That includes people who made mistakes and want to learn. This is not only about punishment. It's about learning and rebuilding trust. But where there is a pattern of behavior and evidence of refusal to follow company standards, we will act decisively. The HR director cleared her throat. Given the prior complaints regarding Mr. Walsh and the documentation we have now, we recommend termination for cause. She handed Maya a redacted packet with the prior entries. He was previously counseled in February, and there's a documented escalation in July with a warning that required coaching. There's a pattern. Derek's case was palpable on the page. Warnings that had not stuck, training sessions missed, and an escalating pattern of distrustful behavior towards specific guest profiles. In a different organization, someone might have been given more time. Here, the cost to guests was too tangible. Maya folded the packet back. We will offer any staff members who show a willingness to learn a path to redemption, she said. But we will terminate where patterns persist. Marcus, please coordinate the investigatory documentation. HR, prepare the termination and severance packet that is legally appropriate. We will not allow this to be a spectacle. Any public communication will be factual and include what we're doing to fix it. Marcus nodded. I'll handle it. Outside the penthouse windows, the city hummed. The composition of the next few hours was complicated not just by personnel moves, but by public perception. Jennifer's clip had already been reposted dozens of times, and journalists were calling for a statement. Maya made a choice that was risky and necessary. Be early, be transparent, and outline concrete commitments. The PR draft that landed in her inbox an hour later was a careful, concise note that acknowledged the incident, confirmed an investigation, and announced immediate steps: suspension of the implicated manager, a pledge to review all logged complaints, and the launch of a guest dignity initiative with external oversight and a timeline for reporting. She approved the statement with 2 edits: make the language about dignity a priority, and include the figure for how quickly the company planned to publish a preliminary audit. 5 business days. 5 days, she told the team. That's long enough to get basic verification and short enough that it won't look like we're hiding. And I want a public dashboard. Transparency is not an optional detail here. What will the guest dignity initiative include? Asked the regional director. Maya had already thought through the architecture. First, a real-time reporting mechanism. QR codes placed in every lobby and guest room that link to an independent portal where guests can report incidents directly to an external oversight committee. Second, mandatory anti-bias and de-escalation training, 12 hours annually for front-of-house staff, with documented assessments. Third, public publication of quarterly metrics for each property, complaints by category, resolution times, and retention numbers. Fourth, an external auditor retained by the Oversight Committee to verify compliance. Fifth, a community liaison program that includes people from local advocacy groups and active witnesses like Jennifer. The room made small noises of assent. The plan was detailed but achievable. It included measurable requirements and accountability. More importantly, it centered the guest's experience without neglecting staff development. Patricia spoke up. If we can do retraining instead of immediate dismissal for some staff, offer it, if they engage sincerely. I don't want to lose people who can be retrained. Maya met her eyes. You're right. That's one of the 3 options we discussed. We will make room for rehabilitation, but it must be documented. If someone is committed, they must show the work. Sarah, who was still tender from the previous night, had a question. Will there be counseling? She asked. For staff who realized they were wrong, and for guests who were harmed? Yes, Maya said. We'll offer restorative justice sessions facilitated by a neutral third party and compensation pathways for those who experienced harm. It won't be just boxes checked. It will be real remediation. The first concrete personnel outcome came within an hour. Derek, sitting in the HR office, had been given time to respond to the prior complaints, to tell his side. He muttered that he had followed policy and that he had been protecting the hotel from fraud. He said he feared the night shift had unique pressures and that sometimes tough decisions had to be made. He apologized for the tone of his language, but his apology felt small. With 3 prior formal complaints and a refusal to follow coaching, HR recommended termination. Derek asked for his badge and left before the termination was completed, handing in a short resignation letter rather than staying to contest the disciplinary action publicly. He did not raise his voice. He walked out as if the stage had been removed from underneath him. It would be easy to depict Derek as a villain and move on. Maya did not want that. She wanted to make the organizational lessons stick. So she insisted HR schedule a meeting for employees that same morning. A town hall, where the facts would be presented, the steps explained, and an invitation extended to staff who wanted to participate in the retraining program. The town hall was held in the Sterling Grand's conference room at 10 a.m. Staff lined up, coffee cups in hand, seeking not theater, but clarity. Maya began by acknowledging the harm. She spoke of dignity, of building hotels that honor the whole person, and of the concrete steps the company would take. She did not dwell on Derek's resignation. She made it clear that institutional reform mattered more than private retribution. "We are not here to score points," she said. "We are here to make sure this never recurs. That requires policies, training, monitoring, and accountability. And it requires people's humility." Sarah spoke next, voice small but steady. She apologized directly to anyone who had been harmed and asked for guidance on how to do better. Patricia, too, spoke of regret and asked for help to be better. Marcus announced a new front desk protocol that would require a supervisor override for any denial of service and a second review audit for any incident that escalated to security. Outside, the story continued to spread. Journalists arrived, but because Maya had acted swiftly and transparently, the company's statement was not one of defensive obfuscation. It acknowledged harm, announced steps, and invited an external auditor. Social media continued to be a chorus, some voices demanding firmer punishments, others urging care for staff who were willing to learn. The public pressure would not be the sole driver of change, but it made sure the company could not comfortably ignore the problem. Over the next 48 hours, the team assembled the preliminary audit that Maya had requested. It was a cold, truth-telling document, a spreadsheet of complaints, a timeline of prior incidents, and matching revenue and retention figures. The auditor, an independent consultant whom Maya had worked with years earlier, verified that the trends were real and recommended immediate adoption of a reporting portal, mandatory audits, and a pilot for the Guest Dignity Initiative at 3 properties, including the Sterling Grand. Maya accepted the recommendations and expanded them. She authorized emergency funding to cover the cost of the external auditor, the technology platform, and the community oversight stipends. She wanted the initiative to be both authoritative and accountable to the communities it served. In the weeks that followed, the hotel became a study in practical remediation. The QR codes were installed in lobbies and rooms within a week. The anonymous external reporting portal launched with Jennifer's help as a public liaison, who could explain to online audiences how to submit reports and what to expect. The company launched 12-hour mandatory anti-bias training for all front-of-house staff, which combined classroom work, role-playing scenarios, and assessments. There were restorative circles facilitated by neutral mediators for guests and staff who wanted to engage in a reparative process. Not everyone accepted the company's offer. A few staff members, angered, embarrassed, unwilling to change, took the severance options and left. It was painful, but necessary. Patricia chose retraining and became one of the most visible proponents of the new protocols, volunteering to co-facilitate staff sessions and to sit on a local advisory panel. Sarah enrolled in the training and, in time, became a peer mentor who helped new hires understand how microaggressions show up in small choices. Marcus continued to keep his focus on safety protocols, emphasizing de-escalation and accountability rather than punishment. Jennifer met with Maya to talk about the community liaison role. "I don't want to be used for PR," she said bluntly. "I want to be part of something that really changes things. People streaming don't always get closure. We need follow-through." "That's exactly what I had in mind," Maya said. "You'll have access to the audit reports and a seat at the oversight committee. We'll publish quarterly metrics. If we fail, I want you to tell us where we fail." What about legal? Jennifer asked. If guests do report, how do you protect them? We will work with counsel to ensure confidentiality and safety, Maya answered. We'll also ensure an independent ombudsman is available. The Guest Dignity Initiative took shape as a living project, a public dashboard that displayed complaint numbers, resolution rates, median response time, a training certification tracking system, and a community oversight board composed of local advocates, legal experts, and witnesses. Within the first month, the portal collected dozens of reports. Some were duplicates of incidents already logged, some were new concerns. Each was triaged and assigned for investigation. There were moments of real human reckoning. A middle-aged woman who had been refused early check-in because she looked like she wasn't a guest returned to the hotel to meet Sarah and Patricia. They sat in a small back office and had a mediated conversation that was rough and slow but sincere. Apologies were offered, restitution discussed, and a plan agreed to ensure better future treatment. The woman's story became part of the training materials, an anonymized case study about how assumptions create harm and how small changes in verification practices could avert escalation. Meanwhile, the external auditor compiled a report for the first 90 days. The numbers were promising and honest. Guest complaints tagged as discriminatory treatment had decreased 48% at the Sterling Grand since the initiative launched. Average response time to reported incidents dropped from 48 hours to under 12. Staff turnover had declined by 10 percentage points. Training completion at front desks across pilot properties hit 97% compliance. Public sentiment, measured by sentiment analysis of social mentions and NPS surveys, showed an uptick in perceived fairness in service. Maya did not let the positive numbers turn into complacency. She insisted the audit be published in full, redacted for privacy where necessary, and asked the Oversight Board to critique it openly. The board did. They recommended expanding the program, tightening escalation windows, and ensuring that the ombudsman role had guaranteed independence and funding. In the meantime, Derek's path diverged from the rest. He had resigned before a formal termination could be issued, and while some in the public relished that fact, Maya was more interested in systems than private vengeance. She authorized an offer, made through an external firm rather than Sterling Estates, to fund a mandatory re-education and sensitivity program for managers in similar roles across the portfolio. Derek had the option to participate in a supervised remedial program that would include counseling, managerial retraining, and monitoring. He would not be eligible for frontline supervisory roles until he completed a multi-step process involving independent verification of behavioral change. He chose instead to accept the resignation quietly and began a course of private coaching. She did not gloat. She wanted the system to change, which sometimes meant making structural choices about who belonged in what roles. 3 months after the incident, Maya convened a public review session in the same Sterling Grand conference room. The event was live-streamed and moderated by a member of the Oversight Board. Guests, staff, community members, and national press attended. The external auditor presented the data. Complaints down, resolution times improved, training compliance high. The Oversight Board offered its critique, and the company committed to scaling the initiative to 20 properties in the next year. Patricia took the podium. Her voice was steady. She spoke of humility and responsibility, and of the work she had done to co-design a front desk script that removed subjective language and emphasized verification processes that did not center assumptions about guests. Sarah spoke about the training and about the discomfort of confronting one's own bias. I thought I was being careful, she admitted, but I wasn't. I thought the badge of authority gave me rightness. I learned to listen and to check myself. Jennifer spoke too. She described her experience as a witness and how she had been invited into the Oversight Committee. There's a difference between getting attention and getting change, she said. This is one of the first times I've seen both. Marcus presented the security upgrades, clear protocols that emphasize documentation, a requirement for a secondary review before calling law enforcement when discrimination was suspected, and a check that required HR involvement for any removal that was not linked to imminent physical danger. He acknowledged the tension between safety and dignity and described how the new protocols allowed both to be centered. Maya closed the session not with victory, but with an invitation. She described a three-point plan to scale the initiative: technology deployment across properties, formalized oversight with a funded ombudsman, and integration of the initiative into every performance metric for front-of-house leadership. "This is not an answer," she said. "It is a process. It will need to be tested and corrected. But it is a start." The press asked the tough questions. "How do you prevent this from being a PR stunt?" a reporter asked. Maya answered plainly, "Commit to public metrics and allow external folks to audit and critique the work. If the numbers slip, publish the failures and the plan to fix them." That transparency would be the true test. There were skeptics. Some argued that social media had done what litigation could not: enforce immediate accountability. Others noted that the company's response was enabled by Maya's position. She did not deny that. Ownership and wealth confer access to faster levers. The point was not to obscure that reality, but to use it to build durable structures that would outlast individual shareholders. For Maya, the project was personal because hospitality had once saved her. She used to tell a brief story in stakeholder meetings. Early in her 20s, when the company was a fledgling idea and rent outstripped cash flow, she had been turned away from an expensive hotel for being late. An overnight clerk had let her in when he saw a flash of tenacity in her eyes. That small mercy had sustained her long enough to keep trying. She had never taken that kindness for granted. It animated the reform work she now led. A year later, Sterling Estates published its first full case study of the initiative. The report was long and frank. It documented the incident, the response, and the measurable outcomes. It included the Oversight Board's recommendations and the company's commitments. It included stories from guests and staff who had engaged with the process. Importantly, it also included a candid section that discussed where the company had fallen short: delays in training scheduling, clumsy communications that initially framed the incident as a personnel matter, and the challenge of scaling an ombudsman structure across multiple jurisdictions. The report's conclusion was modest. Tangible improvement was possible, but it required persistent attention. Sterling Estates committed to a 3-year rollout plan and to funding independent audits with publication on an annual basis. For Derek, for Patricia, for Sarah, the aftermath shaped life choices. Derek enrolled in a professional coaching program, but his return to the hospitality industry was not immediate. Patricia stayed, deeply involved in mentoring, and later became a certified trainer for the company's customer dignity curriculum. Sarah, who had once trembled at the desk, later stood in front of new hires and told her story in sober terms, a cautionary tale and a testament to growth. Jennifer became the community liaison the company had promised. She co-hosted public webinars about reporting discrimination and advised on the design of the guest reporting portal to ensure it was intuitive and trusted. Marcus continued to lead security, but now spent more of his time training teams on de-escalation and documentation than on physical removal. 3 months into the program, the Sterling Grand posted a small plaque by the lobby, an acknowledgement, not a trophy. It read in plain type, "This property is committed to guest dignity, QR reporting, independent oversight, and transparent metrics. If you experience discrimination, please report. We will listen, document, and act." The plaque was not a monument to one woman's vindication. It was a commitment to a process that, the company hoped, would prevent the next humiliation. In quiet moments, Maya still thought about the portrait on the wall. She had never wanted an image of herself to be a cudgel or a gimmick. Yet that night, it had functioned as a hinge. She had used what power she had to convert a moment of public humiliation into a program for public good. She rejected spectacle and wanted substance. That tension, between the speed of viral attention and the slower gears of institutional change, was the work she chose to do. On the anniversary of the incident, the Sterling Grand held a small community forum. The Oversight Board presented its Year 1 report. Complaint rates down by a sustained 40% across pilot sites. Training completion at 100% for frontline staff. Median response time to reports at 8 hours, and staff retention improving. More properties were added to the program the following quarter. Stories of repair, quiet apologies, restitutions, protocols that stopped escalation before it began, were part of the narrative. But the report also included failures and plans for improvement. The Oversight Board recommended continuing the external audit and expanding funds for the Ombudsman Office. Maya recorded a short message that evening for the company's intranet and for public release. Her voice was calm. She spoke of dignity and of accountability and of the commitments that had been made. She thanked the staff who had bravely admitted mistake and leaned into learning, and she thanked witnesses like Jennifer who had held the company accountable. "This will not erase all harm," she said, "but if we are serious about change, we must build infrastructure that ensures respect, transparency, and swift remedy. This is our commitment." The mural of the story had shifted in the public imagination from a single viral humiliation to a case study about reform. People debated whether the architecture she had built would outlast attention cycles, and that debate was healthy. The company's transparency meant it could not hide if metrics slipped. Months later, Maya received a letter from a woman who had once been refused service in another city. The letter was not about the Sterling Grand specifically, but about how hard it felt to be unseen. "I read your report," the woman wrote. "For the first time in years I felt like someone was trying to build a system that would notice people like me. Thank you." These were the small moments that mattered, more than headlines. The public moment had opened a door. The harder work had been in walking through it and tending the hinges. At the end of the day, the portrait on the wall remained, but now the plaque next to it included a small line. A reminder that appearance must never be a barrier to welcome. It was not a monument to one woman's power, but a reminder of a pledge. The lobby, rebalanced, was quieter in a better way. Less performance, more protocol. Maya continued to travel. She continued to open linens and systems to inspection. She continued to press for transparency, for outside voices in, and for the stubborn, often boring work of process. She did not claim to have solved the world's problems, only to have chosen a method for addressing one particular kind of harm. For viewers of the story, those who had watched Jennifer's feed, those who had read the report, those who had stood at desks and wondered what to do next, the takeaway was practical. Insist on documentation, demand transparency, and support structures that make dignity measurable. If you've ever experienced or witnessed similar treatment, there are practical steps. Document the incident. Time, names, take photos, record if safe. Use technology. QR codes often link to external portals that create an independent record. Report to local advocacy groups and, where available, contact an ombudsman. If you're comfortable, share your story. Public witness can create change, but it also needs structure. And finally, if you want to follow more stories of accountability and reform, follow this channel and check the links in the description for resources on reporting discrimination and supporting local advocacy groups. We'll continue to bring you cases where public witness meets institutional change, and what it takes to make that change stick.